The late afternoon sun streamed through the blinds of our small apartment in downtown Chicago, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor I had just finished mopping. The familiar scent of lavender fabric softener filled the air as I stood in our bedroom, carefully folding Jake's work shirts, the same blue button-downs he wore to his job at the insurance company every single day. I had been doing this routine for 3 years now. Wake up at 6 a.m., make coffee, prepare his lunch, kiss him goodbye, go to my part-time job at the local bookstore, come home, clean, cook, do laundry, and repeat. Somewhere along the way, I had convinced myself this was what love looked like, taking care of someone completely, putting their needs before your own. Mia, where's my gray tie? Jake called from the bathroom, his voice carrying that edge of impatience I had grown to recognize and fear. It's in the closet, second drawer, I replied, smoothing out the wrinkles from his shirt with extra care. I had learned that Jake's mood for the entire evening often depended on how well pressed his clothes were. He emerged from the bathroom, hair still damp, adjusting his collar. I told you I needed it laid out with my shirt. I don't have time to go digging through drawers. I felt that familiar knot forming in my stomach, the one that appeared whenever I sensed I had disappointed him again. I'm sorry, I'll remember next time. Jake sighed heavily, the kind of sigh that made me feel like I was a burden rather than a partner. You know what, Mia? Sometimes I wonder what you're actually good for besides cleaning and folding laundry. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there, one of his shirts still in my hands, staring at him as he adjusted his tie in the mirror. He said it so casually, as if he were commenting on the weather, not destroying what was left of my self-worth. What did you say? My voice came out smaller than I intended. You heard me. He turned to face me, his expression cold and matter-of-fact. I work 10 hours a day to pay for this place while you play around at that bookstore part-time. The least you can do is keep things organized. You're just good for cleaning, apparently. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the traffic outside our window, the neighbor's dog barking, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. But inside our bedroom, inside my chest, everything had gone quiet. I set the shirt down on the bed with trembling hands. 3 years of small comments, subtle put-downs, and gradual erosion of my confidence suddenly crystallized into this moment. I looked at Jake, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. When had the man I fell in love with become someone who could speak to me this way? I'm going to make dinner, I said quietly, needing to leave the room before I said something I might regret. Good. I'm meeting clients at 7, so make it quick. He didn't even look at me as he said it. I walked to the kitchen on unsteady legs, my mind racing. As I opened the refrigerator, staring at the contents without really seeing them, I tried to remember the last time Jake had thanked me for anything. When was the last time he had asked about my day, my dreams, my feelings? When had I become invisible in my own relationship? The chicken I had planned to cook for dinner stared back at me, but I couldn't bring myself to start preparing it. Instead, I found myself thinking about my sister Rachel's words from last month. Mia, you're disappearing. Every time I see you, there's less of you there. I had defended Jake then, made excuses about stress at work, about how he was really a good man underneath it all. But standing in our kitchen, with his cruel words still echoing in my ears, I couldn't find any more excuses. My phone buzzed with a text from my coworker, Lisa. Hey, want to grab drinks after work tomorrow? You seem like you could use a friend. I stared at the message, realizing I couldn't remember the last time I had gone out with friends. Jake always had reasons why I shouldn't. We needed to save money. He wanted to spend time together. My friends were a bad influence. Slowly, I had let my social circle shrink until it was just him and me. And now I was learning that maybe there was no us at all. The sound of Jake's footsteps in the hallway made me quickly put my phone away. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, checking his watch. Dinner ready yet? I looked at him, this man I had reorganized my entire life around, and felt something shift inside me. I'm not making dinner tonight. He frowned. What do you mean you're not making dinner? I mean, I'm not cooking tonight. The words came out stronger than I felt. Very funny, Mia. I told you I have clients to meet. I need to eat something. Then you can figure it out yourself. I surprised myself with my calm tone. Jake's face darkened. What's your problem? You're acting weird. My problem. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. My problem is that I just realized I've been living with someone who thinks I'm only good for cleaning. Oh, come on. You're being dramatic. I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it, then? He ran his hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. Look, I'm under a lot of pressure at work. I didn't mean to snap at you, but you have to admit you're not exactly contributing much financially. Each word was like a nail in the coffin of whatever was left of my feelings for him. I had been working part-time because he had convinced me it would be better for our relationship if I was more available, more present at home. Now he was using my reduced income as ammunition against me. I'm going for a walk, I said, grabbing my jacket. What about dinner? I paused at the door. You're a grown man, Jake. Figure it out. As I walked down the busy Chicago streets, the cool October air biting at my cheeks, I felt like I was waking up from a long, suffocating dream. The city lights blurred through my tears, but for the first time in months, they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of clarity. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who had opinions, who laughed loudly, who had dreams of maybe writing a book someday. When had I stopped being her? When had I become this shadow of a person whose only value was in how well I could fold shirts and keep a clean house? By the time I returned to the apartment, Jake was gone. There was a note on the kitchen counter. Went to grab something to eat before my meeting. We'll talk later. I crumpled the note and threw it in the trash. Then I sat at our small kitchen table and really looked at the space I had been maintaining so carefully. Every surface was spotless, every item in its designated place. It was perfect and sterile and completely devoid of any sign that I actually lived there. That's when I noticed my keys sitting on the counter where I had left them. I picked them up, feeling their weight in my palm. 3 keys. 1 for the apartment, 1 for Jake's car that I was allowed to use for groceries, and 1 for the bookstore where I worked. I thought about my colleague Lisa's invitation, about my sister Rachel's concerned face, about all the dreams I had quietly put away to make room for Jake's needs and wants and moods. The decision wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was quiet and certain, like finally exhaling after holding your breath for too long. I walked to the bedroom and pulled out the small suitcase I had brought when I moved in 3 years ago. As I began to pack my clothes, I felt lighter with each item I folded and placed inside. These were my things, my choices, my life to reclaim. When Jake came home 2 hours later, I was sitting on the couch with my suitcase beside me, still wearing my jacket. "What's all this?" he asked, but his tone suggested he already knew. I stood up, walked to the kitchen counter, and placed my keys next to the coffee maker I had used to make his coffee every morning for 3 years. "I'm leaving." "Leaving? Come on, Mia. You're being ridiculous." So I had a bad day and said something stupid. That's not a reason to pack a bag and throw a tantrum. I turned to face him, and I saw confusion in his eyes. He genuinely didn't understand. He couldn't see what was so obvious to me now, that his words hadn't been the cause of my leaving. They had simply been the final confirmation of what I had been trying to ignore for months. This isn't about one bad day, Jake. This is about the fact that you just told me I'm only good for cleaning, and you actually believe it. I said I didn't mean it like that. But you did mean it, and the worst part is I almost started believing it too. I picked up my suitcase and walked toward the door. Jake followed me, his voice taking on a pleading tone I hadn't heard in years. "Mia, wait. Where are you going to go? You can't just leave like this. We can work this out." I paused with my hand on the doorknob. "I'm going to stay with my sister until I figure things out. And Jake? We can't work this out because you don't even see what's broken." As I walked down the hallway toward the elevator, I heard him call my name one more time. But I didn't turn around. For the first time in 3 years, I was walking toward something instead of away from myself. The elevator doors closed, and I saw my reflection in the polished metal. I looked tired and scared, but there was something else there too, something I hadn't seen in a long time. I looked like someone who had just remembered she was worth more than being told she was only good for cleaning. The real journey was just beginning. Rachel's apartment in Lincoln Park was everything mine wasn't, lived in, warm, slightly messy in a way that suggested actual life happened there. She opened the door in her pajamas at 10:30 p.m., took one look at me standing there with my suitcase, and pulled me into the tightest hug I'd received in months. "I was wondering when you'd show up," she said, taking my bag without asking any questions. That's the thing about sisters. Sometimes they know you better than you know yourself. Rachel had been watching me disappear for 3 years, but she had never stopped leaving the light on for me to find my way back. "I left him," I said, and saying it out loud made it real in a way that packing my suitcase hadn't. "Good." She guided me to her couch, which was covered in law books and takeout containers. "I'll make tea. You look like you haven't eaten." As she bustled around her small kitchen, I looked around at the controlled chaos of her life. Rachel was a public defender, always juggling too many cases, always fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. Her apartment reflected that energy, urgent, purposeful, alive. "So," she said, settling beside me with 2 steaming mugs, "what finally did it?" I told her about the shirt folding, about Jake's casual cruelty, about the moment I realized I had become a ghost in my own life. Rachel listened without interrupting, but I could see her jaw tighten with each detail. "You know what makes me angry," she said when I finished. "It's not just that he said those things. It's that he conditioned you to think you deserved them. I don't think I deserve them. Mia, you've been apologizing for existing for 3 years. You moved in with him and somehow moved out of your own life." Her words stung because they were true. I had been so focused on being the perfect girlfriend that I had forgotten to be myself. My phone buzzed. A text from Jake. "This is crazy. Come home so we can talk like adults." I showed Rachel the message, and she rolled her eyes. "Let me guess. You're being dramatic. You're overreacting. You're not thinking clearly." "How did you know?" "Because men like Jake have a playbook, and they all use the same pages." I stared at the message, feeling the familiar pull to respond, to explain, to try to fix things. But then I remembered the look on Jake's face when he told me I was only good for cleaning. Not apologetic, not shocked at his own words, just matter of fact. That was who he really was when he thought I had no other options. "I'm not texting him back," I said, more to convince myself than to tell Rachel. "Good. Let him sit with the consequences of his actions for once." We stayed up until 2 a.m., talking about everything and nothing. Rachel told me about her cases, her dating disasters, her dreams of maybe running for office someday. I realized it had been years since I'd had a conversation that wasn't about Jake's day, Jake's needs, Jake's feelings. "I forgot how much I liked talking to you," I said as we were getting ready for bed. "I forgot how much I liked you," Rachel replied. "The real you, not the diminished version you've been carrying around." The next morning, I woke up on Rachel's couch to the smell of actual breakfast cooking. Jake never cooked, that was my job. But Rachel was standing at the stove, making scrambled eggs and toast like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Sleep okay?" she asked, not mentioning the fact that I had cried myself to sleep. Better than I have in months, actually. My phone had been buzzing all night. 17 text messages from Jake, each one cycling through anger, bargaining, and what I was starting to recognize as manipulation. "You can't just run away from our problems. I'm sorry I hurt your feelings, but this is an overreaction. Your stuff is still here. You'll have to come back eventually. I talked to my mom. She thinks you're going through something and should get help." That last one made me laugh. but not in a good way. Jake's mother had always treated me like an inconvenience, like I was lucky her son had chosen to date me. The idea that she thought I needed help for finally standing up for myself was both infuriating and somehow liberating. You know what's funny? I told Rachel as she handed me a plate of eggs. I'm angrier about him involving his mother than I am about anything else. That's because it's a violation. He's trying to build a coalition against you to make you feel crazy for having boundaries. Rachel had always been the smart one, the one who saw through people's bullshit. I had envied that skill, but now I was grateful for it. I need to go to work, I said, checking the time. I can't just disappear from my job too. Do you want me to drive you? I think I need to do this myself. The bookstore where I worked was a small, independent shop in Wicker Park called The Turning Page. It was the kind of place that sold poetry chapbooks and hosted author readings, where regulars knew your name and your coffee order. I had taken the job because it paid decent money part-time, but I had stayed because I loved being surrounded by stories. Lisa was already there when I arrived, rearranging the window display. She took one look at my face and immediately put down the books she was holding. Rough night, she asked gently. I left Jake. Oh, honey. She pulled me into a hug that smelled like vanilla and coffee. Are you okay? Do you need to talk about it? I found myself telling the story again, but this time it felt different. Rachel's reaction had been protective, sisterly anger. Lisa's was something else, recognition. I did the same thing 5 years ago, she said quietly. Left my ex-husband. He used to tell me I was too sensitive, too emotional, too much. It took me 2 years to realize that too much was just his way of saying he couldn't handle a woman with opinions. How did you know it was the right decision? Because I stopped waiting for permission to exist. That phrase hit me like a lightning bolt. Permission to exist. That's exactly what I had been doing, asking Jake's permission to have feelings, to make plans, to take up space in my own life. The hardest part, Lisa continued, is learning to trust yourself again. You've been told for so long that your instincts are wrong, that you start to doubt everything. I keep thinking maybe I should have tried harder to make him understand. Mia, you can't make someone understand your worth. They either see it or they don't. And if they don't, no amount of explaining is going to change that. We worked in comfortable silence for a while, the familiar rhythm of shelving books and helping customers, providing a kind of meditation. I realized I had always felt more like myself at work than I did at home. Here, people asked for my recommendations, valued my opinions about books, treated me like an expert in something. Around noon, my phone rang. Jake. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the decline button. You don't have to answer, Lisa said softly. I know. But I did answer, stepping outside onto the sidewalk. Mia, thank God. I've been trying to reach you all morning. I saw your texts. Look, I'm sorry about last night. I was stressed, and I took it out on you. But running away isn't the answer. There it was again, the implication that I was running away rather than moving toward something better. I'm not running away, Jake. I'm choosing to leave. It's the same thing. No, it's not. Running away is what you do when you're scared. This is what you do when you're finally not scared anymore. There was a long pause. I don't understand what you want from me. I don't want anything from you. That's the point. So what, this is it. 3 years down the drain because I had a bad day. This isn't about one bad day and you know it. This is about the fact that you've been treating me like hired help for months, and last night you finally just said it out loud. I don't treat you like hired help. When was the last time you asked me about my day? Silence. When was the last time you thanked me for cooking or cleaning or doing your laundry? More silence. When was the last time you acted like you actually liked me, not just what I could do for you? That's not fair. It's perfectly fair, and the fact that you can't answer any of those questions tells me everything I need to know. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, and for a moment I thought he might actually engage with what I was saying. But then he sighed, that same dismissive sigh from the night before. "You're being emotional. When you calm down, we can discuss this rationally." And there it was, the final nail in the coffin of whatever hope I might have had for salvaging our relationship. He couldn't even hear me when I was being perfectly calm and rational. In his mind, any woman who disagreed with him was automatically being emotional. "I am calm, Jake. This is what calm looks like. I'm done." I hung up and turned off my phone. When I went back inside, Lisa was helping a customer find a book about divorce recovery. "Synchronicity," she said with a wry smile after the customer left. "Is that what this is?" Maybe. Or maybe it's just time. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of normal work activities that felt extraordinary because I was doing them as a free person. I wasn't watching the clock, worried about getting home in time to start dinner. I wasn't mentally calculating how long it would take to stop at the grocery store and still have Jake's evening routine ready. I was just present. At closing time, Lisa asked if I wanted to grab that drink we had talked about. I probably shouldn't. I need to figure out my living situation, and I should call my mom and... "Mia." "What?" "You just left a relationship where you weren't allowed to make spontaneous decisions. Maybe start practicing." She was right. I had been so conditioned to plan everything around Jake's schedule that I had forgotten I could just do things. "Okay," said. "Let's get that drink." We went to a small wine bar a few blocks away, the kind of place with exposed brick walls and candles on every table. I had walked past it hundreds of times, but never gone in because Jake didn't like wine bars. Too pretentious, he said. "To new beginnings," Lisa said, raising her glass. "To remembering who I am," I replied. As we talked, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the pleasure of being heard. Lisa asked follow-up questions, laughed at my jokes, shared her own stories. It was like remembering how to breathe properly after years of holding your breath. "Can I ask you something?" Lisa said as we ordered a second glass of wine. "Of course." "What do you want to do now? Not practically, not logistically. What do you actually want?" I stared at her, realizing I had no idea how to answer that question. For 3 years, what I wanted had been irrelevant. What mattered was what Jake wanted, what made Jake happy, what kept Jake comfortable. "I don't know," I admitted. I used to want to write. I had this idea for a book about women who work in bookstores, like a behind-the-scenes look at literary culture. But that was before. Before what? Before Jake told me it was unrealistic and I should focus on more practical things. Like folding his shirts? Exactly. Lisa was quiet for a moment, swirling her wine. "You know what I think? I think you've been living someone else's life for so long that you forgot you had your own." "So, how do I remember?" You start small. You make one decision that's entirely yours, and then you make another one, and then another. Eventually, you build up enough of them that you remember what your own voice sounds like. Walking back to Rachel's apartment that night, I thought about what Lisa had said. One decision at a time. I had made the decision to leave. I had made the decision to stay away despite Jake's calls and texts. I had made the decision to have a drink with a friend. They were small decisions, but they were mine. And for the first time in 3 years, that felt like enough. The third morning at Rachel's, I woke up before my alarm and lay on the couch watching the sun rise over the Chicago skyline. In the distance, I could see the building where Jake and I had lived together, and I felt nothing. Not sadness, not anger, not even relief. Just a quiet recognition that that chapter of my life was over. My phone showed 23 missed calls from Jake and a long email that I deleted without reading. I was learning that not every form of communication required a response. Rachel emerged from her bedroom in her work clothes, looking harried but determined. "I have to be in court in an hour, but I wanted to talk to you about something first." "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I have a proposal." She poured herself coffee and sat across from me. My friend Diana is a literary agent. She's looking for someone to help with her client correspondence, maybe some light editing work. It's part-time, but it pays well, and she said she'd be open to talking to you. Rachel, I can't. You can't what? You can't take a job that actually uses your English degree? You can't work for someone who might appreciate your brain instead of your ability to organize their sock drawer. I had forgotten that Rachel knew about my degree. I had forgotten that I had a degree at all. Jake had mentioned it so rarely that it had begun to feel like something I had imagined rather than something I had actually achieved. I wouldn't even know how to interview for something like that. You would figure it out. You used to be good at figuring things out. Used to be. That phrase was becoming the story of my life. I used to be confident. I used to have opinions. I used to believe I was capable of more than domestic maintenance. What if I'm not good enough? What if you are? Rachel left her business card on the table. Diana's number is on the back. Call her today. The worst thing that can happen is she says no, and you'll be exactly where you are now. After Rachel left, I sat with the card for an hour, turning it over in my hands. The smart thing would be to focus on finding a full-time position at a bookstore or maybe a library. Something safe, something I knew I could do. But Jake had always encouraged me to think small, to choose the safe option, to avoid taking risks that might lead to failure. Maybe that was exactly why I needed to make the call. Diana Rodriguez had a warm voice and a direct manner that reminded me of Rachel. She suggested we meet at a coffee shop in the Loop that afternoon, and I spent the morning researching her agency and trying to remember how to talk about myself as someone with value to offer. The coffee shop was crowded with the lunch rush, but I spotted Diana immediately. She was the woman sitting alone, reading a manuscript and making notes in the margins. She looked up as I approached, and her smile was genuinely welcoming. Mia, I'm so glad you called. Rachel's told me wonderful things about you. I hope she wasn't overselling me. She said you're smart, well-read, and ready for a change. That's exactly what I need. We talked for 2 hours. Diana needed someone who could read query letters and manuscripts, help with client communications, and eventually maybe take on some developmental editing work. It was part-time to start, but she hinted that it could grow into something more substantial if things worked out. I have to ask, she said as we were wrapping up, why are you leaving your current job? I had practiced this answer, but sitting across from Diana, I found myself telling the truth instead of the polished version I had prepared. I'm not leaving a job. I'm leaving a life that was too small for me. Diana nodded as if this made perfect sense. Good. I need someone who's hungry, not someone who's settling. She offered me the position on the spot, starting the following Monday. As I walked back to the bookstore to give my notice, I felt a kind of electricity I hadn't experienced in years. I had a job that would challenge me, that would let me use my brain, that might actually lead somewhere. Lisa was happy for me, but sad to see me go. You're going to do amazing things, she said as we hugged goodbye. How do you know? Because you're finally awake. That evening, I called my parents for the first time in months. They lived in a small town in Wisconsin, and I had been avoiding them because I knew they would ask about Jake, about our plans, about when we might get married. I hadn't known how to explain that I was with someone who thought I was only good for cleaning. Mia. My mother's voice was bright with surprise. We were just talking about you. Good things, I hope. Always good things. How's Jake? Jake and I broke up, Mom. There was a pause. Oh, honey, what happened? I gave them the abbreviated version, focusing on the incompatibility rather than the cruelty. But my father, who had always been perceptive, read between the lines. Sounds like you're better off without him, he said quietly. You think so? I think you sound more like yourself than you have in years. What do you mean? You sound present. For the last few visits, it was like you were only half there, like you were always listening for something else. I realized he was right. I had been listening for Jake's approval, Jake's mood, Jake's needs. I had been so focused on managing his emotional temperature that I had forgotten to pay attention to my own. "I got a new job," I told them, and as I described Diana's agency, I heard excitement in my own voice that I hadn't heard in years. "That sounds wonderful," my mother said. "We're proud of you." "For what?" "For choosing yourself." That night, I wrote in a journal for the first time since college. I wrote about the apartment I was going to find, about the book I might write, about the woman I was remembering how to be. I wrote about Jake too, but not with anger or sadness. I wrote about him like a chapter that was finished, not a story that had been interrupted. The next morning, I went apartment hunting. I had saved some money from my bookstore job, money that Jake had suggested I put toward our future, but that I had kept in a separate account. It wasn't much, but it was enough for a security deposit on a small studio apartment in a converted warehouse in the Arts District. The apartment was tiny, but had huge windows and exposed brick walls. Standing in the empty space, I could envision where I would put my books, where I would set up a desk to write, where I would make morning coffee and read the newspaper without worrying about someone else's schedule. "I'll take it," I told the landlord. "Don't you want to think about it? Look at a few more places." "No, this is it." That afternoon, I went back to the apartment I had shared with Jake to collect my things. I had texted him that I was coming, and he had responded with a long message about how we should talk, how he had been thinking about what I said, how he wanted to work things out. I didn't respond. He was waiting for me when I arrived, standing in the living room I had cleaned so carefully for 3 years. The space looked different somehow, smaller, more cluttered, less like a home and more like a place where someone happened to sleep. "You look good," he said, and I realized he was surprised. "Thank you. I mean, you look different. Happier." "I am happier." He seemed to be waiting for me to elaborate, but I didn't owe him an explanation for my happiness. I had spent years explaining my feelings to him, and he had spent years dismissing them. I was done with that dynamic. "I've been thinking about what you said," Jake continued, following me into the bedroom as I packed my remaining clothes. "About not asking about your day and not thanking you for things. Okay, you're right. I could have been more appreciative. Could have been. I should have been. I should have been more appreciative." I folded my sweaters and placed them in a box, the same careful way I had folded his shirts. But this time, I was taking care of my own things, making my own choices. "I'm sorry," he said when I didn't respond. "I'm sorry I made you feel unappreciated." "I don't think you made me feel unappreciated, Jake. I think you actually didn't appreciate me." "That's not true." "When was the last time you told me you loved me?" He was quiet for a long moment. I don't remember." "When was the last time you asked me what I wanted for dinner, instead of telling me what you wanted me to cook?" More silence. "When was the last time you considered my feelings before making a decision that affected both of us?" "This isn't fair. You're setting up impossible questions." "They're not impossible, Jake. They're basic, and the fact that you can't answer them is exactly why I left." I continued packing, and he continued trying to negotiate to find some middle ground where I might come back and we could try again. But I wasn't interested in trying again. I was interested in trying something completely different. "I don't understand why you're being so stubborn about this," he said finally. "I'm not being stubborn. I'm being clear." "What's the difference?" Stubborn is when you refuse to compromise. Clear is when you know what you will and won't accept. And you won't accept me. I won't accept being treated like I'm only good for cleaning. I said I was sorry about that. You said you were sorry I felt unappreciated. That's not the same thing. As I loaded my boxes into Rachel's car, Jake stood in the doorway watching me. He looked genuinely confused, like he couldn't understand how he had gotten from folding shirts to this final goodbye. "I love you," he said as I closed the trunk. "I know you do, but you love me like a convenience, not like a person." What does that mean? It means you love having me around to make your life easier. But you don't love who I am when I'm not making your life easier. That's not true. Jake, last night I went to a wine bar with a friend. I drank 2 glasses of wine and talked about books and laughed until my cheeks hurt. When was the last time you saw me that happy? He thought for a moment. I don't know. That's the problem. You don't know because you weren't paying attention. You were paying attention to whether your shirts were wrinkled and whether dinner was ready, but you weren't paying attention to me. I got in the car and rolled down the window. I hope you figure out how to be happy, Jake. I really do. But I can't be responsible for your happiness anymore. As I drove away, I saw him in the rearview mirror, still standing in the doorway, still looking confused. I felt sad for him, but not sad enough to turn around. That night, I slept in my new apartment for the first time. I had a sleeping bag on the floor and takeout containers from the Thai place downstairs, and it was the most peaceful evening I'd had in years. I wasn't waiting for anyone to come home, wasn't anticipating anyone's mood, wasn't planning anyone's tomorrow but my own. I was finally home. 6 months later, I was sitting in a coffee shop in Logan Square, editing a manuscript about a woman who leaves her marriage to become a travel writer. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had become the kind of person who helped other people tell their stories about finding themselves. Working for Diana had been everything I had hoped and more. She was demanding but fair, brilliant but kind, and she treated me like a colleague rather than an assistant. I had started with simple tasks, reading query letters, responding to client emails, but had gradually taken on more complex work. I was now doing developmental editing for 3 of her clients, and she had hinted that a promotion might be coming. You have good instincts, she had told me the week before. You see what a story needs, not just what it has. I had thought about that comment often. For 3 years with Jake, I had focused on what I had, a relationship, a place to live, someone who said he loved me. I had ignored what I needed: respect, appreciation, a partner who saw me as more than a supporting character in his life. Now I was learning to see what I needed, not just what I had. My phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. Coffee later? I have news. I smiled and typed back, absolutely. The usual place. Lisa had become one of my closest friends, and our weekly coffee dates were something I looked forward to all week. She had been my first example of what life could look like when you prioritized your own happiness, and I would always be grateful for that. The manuscript I was editing was due back to the author that afternoon, so I focused on the final chapter. The protagonist was standing on a pier in San Francisco, watching the sunset and reflecting on how different her life had become. She was alone but not lonely, independent but not isolated. I had spent so many years trying to be what other people needed me to be, she wrote, that I had forgotten what I needed me to be. I highlighted the line and made a note in the margin. Beautiful. This captures exactly what your character's journey has been about. As I typed the note, I realized I could have been writing about myself. The coffee shop was busy with the lunch crowd, but I had claimed a corner table where I could spread out my work. I loved the energy of the place, the conversations, the clatter of dishes, the sense that life was happening all around me. It was so different from the quiet, controlled environment of the apartment I had shared with Jake. "Excuse me, are you Mia?" I looked up to see a woman about my age, with short brown hair and kind eyes. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her. "Yes. I'm Katie. I work at the bookstore down the street. Lisa told me about you. You're the one who left your boyfriend and started over, right?" I nodded, slightly uncomfortable with being known for my breakup. "I'm sorry, I don't mean to bother you. It's just, I'm in a similar situation, and Lisa said you might be someone I could talk to." I closed my laptop and gestured to the empty chair across from me. "Of course. Sit." Katie's story was achingly familiar. A boyfriend who had gradually eroded her confidence, who had convinced her that her dreams were impractical, who had made her feel like she was lucky he tolerated her at all. She had been living with him for 2 years, and like me, She had been doing all the emotional labor while he reaped all the benefits. "The thing is," she said, stirring her coffee nervously, "I know I should leave. I know this isn't healthy, but I'm scared." "What are you scared of?" "Being alone, starting over, making the wrong decision." I nodded, remembering that feeling, the terror of stepping into the unknown, even when the known was making you miserable. "Can I tell you something?" I said. I was terrified too. I thought I was making a huge mistake. But you know what I learned? "What?" "Being alone isn't the same as being lonely. I was lonelier in my relationship than I've ever been by myself." Katie's eyes filled with tears. "Really? Really? And starting over isn't starting from nothing. It's starting from everything you've learned about what you don't want." We talked for another hour, and I found myself giving her the same advice Lisa had given me. Start small, make one decision at a time, trust your instincts. As she left, she hugged me tightly. "Thank you," she said. I needed to hear that from someone who actually did it. Watching her walk away, I felt a sense of purpose I had never experienced before. I wasn't just living my own life. I was helping other people see that they could live theirs too. That evening, I met Lisa at our usual wine bar. She was practically vibrating with excitement when I arrived. "Okay, spill," I said, settling into my seat. "What's the news?" "I got the promotion. I'm going to be the store manager." "Lisa, that's amazing." I raised my glass. "You deserve it." "There's more. Remember how I told you I was thinking about starting a book club for women who are going through transitions? Well, corporate approved it. They want to make it a regular thing. That's incredible. I want you to help me run it. You have the literary background, and you understand what these women are going through. What do you say?" I thought about Katie, about the gratitude in her eyes when she realized she wasn't alone in her struggle. I thought about my own journey, about how much I had learned about myself in the past 6 months. I say yes. As we planned the book club, I felt that familiar electricity I had experienced when Diana first offered me the job. This was what purpose felt like, not just doing something you were good at, but doing something that mattered. "You know what's funny?" Lisa said as we were leaving. 6 months ago, you were convinced you were only good for cleaning. Now you're helping other women rewrite their stories. What do you think changed? You stopped asking permission to exist. Walking home to my apartment, I reflected on Lisa's words. She was right. I had stopped asking permission. I had stopped waiting for someone else to validate my choices, my feelings, my worth. I had learned to validate myself. My apartment was still small, still sparsely furnished, but it was completely mine. I had hung my books on shelves I had built myself, had created a writing space by the window where I worked on my own stories in the evenings. I had plants that I kept alive, artwork that I had chosen, a life that reflected who I was rather than who someone else needed me to be. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at my desk, looking out at the city lights. On my laptop screen was a document I had been working on for weeks, the beginning of a book about women who work in bookstores, the idea Jake had dismissed as unrealistic. The first chapter was about a woman who realizes she's been living someone else's life and decides to reclaim her own. It was fiction, but it was also autobiography. It was the story I had been too afraid to tell when I was with Jake, but that I was finally brave enough to write. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hi Mia, this is Katie. I wanted to let you know I did it. I left him today. Thank you for showing me it was possible." I smiled and typed back, "Congratulations. The hard part is over. Now the good part begins." As I returned to my writing, I thought about how much had changed since that October evening when I had folded Jake's shirts for the last time. I had found work that challenged me, friends who supported me, a home that felt like mine. But more than that, I had found myself, not the diminished version I had become in my relationship, but the whole, complete person I had always been underneath. The woman who had put her keys on the table and walked away had been brave, but she had also been broken. The woman sitting at this desk, writing her own story, was something more. She was whole. Jake had been right about one thing. I was good at cleaning. But I was also good at so much more. I was good at editing, at listening, at helping other people find their voices. I was good at being alone without being lonely, at building a life that was entirely my own. I was good at being myself. And that, I realized, was more than enough. 6 months after leaving Jake, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. I had discovered that the woman who was just good for cleaning was actually good for so much more. She was good for creating, for supporting, for inspiring. She was good for loving herself enough to demand better. The keys I had left on that table had unlocked more than just an apartment door. They had unlocked a life I had forgotten was possible. A life where I was the main character in my own story, not a supporting player in someone else's. As I wrote the final lines of my first chapter, I smiled at the irony. Jake had told me I was only good for cleaning, and in a way he had been right. I had been very good at cleaning. I had cleaned out a relationship that wasn't serving me, cleaned out beliefs that were limiting me, and cleaned out the fear that had been keeping me small. I had cleaned house, and what I had found underneath all that clutter was a woman who was worth so much more than she had ever been taught to believe. The story I was writing ended with the protagonist standing in her own apartment, surrounded by the life she had built for herself, finally understanding that she had never been just anything. She had always been everything she needed to be. She had just needed to give herself permission to be it. I closed my laptop and looked around my apartment, my sanctuary, my home. Tomorrow, I would start the book club with Lisa, would help other women find their voices the way she had helped me find mine. I would continue editing manuscripts, continue building a career that fulfilled me, continue writing my own story. But tonight, I was content to sit in the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived, a choice well made, a woman finally at home in her own skin. I had put my keys on the table and walked away from a life that was too small for me. And in doing so, I had walked into a life that was exactly the right size, a life that fit me perfectly because I had built it myself. The woman who was just good for cleaning had cleaned up her act, and what she had found underneath was a woman who was good for everything she set her mind to. It had taken me 29 years to learn that lesson, but it was a lesson I would never forget. Sometimes the most important thing you can clean is your own life. And sometimes the most important thing you can walk away from is the person who can't see that you're worth so much more than they're willing to offer. I was worth more. I had always been worth more. And finally, I was living like I believed it.